My name is Sarah Coleman. I'm 31 years old, and as I sat at the dinner table in the home, I had been secretly paying rent for while also covering my sister Michelle's $38,000 annual university tuition. She pointed at me and shrieked, "My $9,000 necklace is gone. She took it." And my father Douglas immediately grabbed my keys, locked me out of the house without asking a single question or searching for any evidence, and told me never to come back. What Douglas, Michelle, and my mother Helen didn't know was that every bill keeping them housed, fed, and educated was being paid by the daughter they had just expelled based on a false accusation, and that within hours of being thrown out, I would systematically cancel every single payment that had been sustaining their comfortable lifestyle for the past 3 years. I've built my career as a pharmaceutical sales representative over the past 9 years, working my way up from entry-level territory management to becoming one of the top performers in my region. My specialty is cardiovascular medications, which requires maintaining relationships with cardiologists, hospitals, and medical practices throughout 3 counties while staying current on complex drug interactions, clinical trial data, and insurance authorization procedures. The demanding nature of pharmaceutical sales, constant travel between medical offices, evening continuing education events, weekend conferences, and the pressure to meet quarterly targets is offset by substantial compensation that includes base salary, commission structure, and performance bonuses. My total annual income has reached approximately $145,000, placing me in a financial position far more stable than most people my age. But the financial security I had worked so hard to achieve became a resource that my family began depending on without ever explicitly acknowledging their dependence or my generosity. The slow shift from occasional help to complete financial support happened gradually enough that nobody seemed to notice how thoroughly my income had become the foundation holding my family's lifestyle together. The beginning of my family's financial dependence started 3 years ago when Douglas's small construction company failed after a major client bankruptcy left him holding unpaid invoices for completed work. His business had been modest, but reliable for 15 years, providing steady income that supported our family throughout my childhood and early adulthood. But the construction industry operates on thin margins and delayed payments, which means that losing a major client who owes substantial money can destroy even established businesses. Douglas had completed a 6-month commercial renovation project worth $180,000, and when the property owner declared bankruptcy before paying the final $120,000 invoice, Douglas was left unable to cover his own subcontractors, suppliers, and operating expenses. The business collapsed within 3 months, and Douglas found himself 57 years old with specialized construction management skills that didn't translate easily to employment opportunities in a market saturated with younger workers who commanded lower salaries. He applied for project management positions, construction supervision roles, and even general labor jobs, but the combination of his age, salary requirements, and industry-specific experience made him consistently passed over for positions that went to candidates who were younger, cheaper, or more desperate. Helen worked as a retail manager at a department store, earning approximately $42,000 annually, enough to contribute to household expenses, but nowhere near enough to cover the full cost of rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, and the other monthly obligations that had previously been met through Douglas's business income. Michelle was in her 2nd year at a prestigious private university, pursuing a degree in marketing with aspirations of working in luxury brand management or high-end retail. The university she had chosen cost $38,000 per year in tuition alone, not including housing, meals, books, and the various personal expenses that college students accumulate. She had some scholarship support that covered approximately $12,000 annually, leaving a gap of $26,000 in tuition costs, plus all her living expenses. The financial crisis that hit my family would have resulted in Michelle dropping out of her expensive university, Douglas and Helen losing their rental home, and a cascade of consequences including ruined credit, possible bankruptcy, and the complete destruction of the middle-class stability they had maintained for decades. I couldn't watch my family implode financially when I had the capability to prevent it, even though preventing their collapse would require significant sacrifice on my part and would fundamentally alter my own financial trajectory and life plans. Have you ever made a decision to help your family that felt temporary but gradually became permanent without anyone acknowledging the transition? That's exactly what happened as I began covering expenses that were supposed to be short-term assistance, but transformed into long-term total support. The help started with Michelle's tuition. I told her I would cover one semester's costs while Douglas found employment, and the family adjusted to their new financial reality. One semester became 1 year, which became 3 years of me paying her full tuition, fees, housing, and a monthly stipend for personal expenses. The total support for Michelle reached approximately $45,000 annually once all the costs were calculated. Similarly, I began helping with rent payments that Douglas and Helen couldn't cover on Helen's retail salary alone. The rental house they lived in cost $2,400 monthly, which was manageable when Douglas's business was operating but became impossible on Helen's income alone. I started making the rent payments directly to their landlord, framing it as temporary assistance until Douglas found work. Then came utilities: electric, water, gas, internet, averaging another $350 monthly that needed to be paid to keep services connected. Then groceries, which I began having delivered weekly to their home using accounts that automatically charged my credit card. Then car insurance for both Douglas and Helen's vehicles, which I added to my own policy to get better rates. Then Helen's health insurance premium since she lost coverage when Douglas's business closed. The systematic addition of expenses happened so gradually that I never made a conscious decision to support my entire family. I just kept adding one more bill to prevent one more crisis, until suddenly I was spending approximately $6,500 monthly on family expenses beyond my own living costs. That's $78,000 annually that was going toward keeping my family housed, fed, educated, and functioning while they struggled to regain financial footing. The arrangement required me to work significantly more than normal to generate the income necessary to support both my own life and my family's needs. I took on additional sales territories when colleagues went on leave, volunteered for every high-commission specialty drug campaign, and worked 75 to 80-hour weeks to maximize my earnings and ensure I could continue meeting all the financial obligations I had assumed. But the sacrifice of my time, energy, and personal financial goals went almost entirely unacknowledged by the family members I was supporting. Douglas spoke vaguely about how he was figuring things out financially, without ever directly discussing the fact that I was paying his rent. Helen mentioned occasionally that she was so grateful for my help, without specifying what help she meant or acknowledging its scope. Michelle talked about her university experience as though it was something she was entitled to, rather than something I was funding entirely. The lack of acknowledgement didn't just feel like ingratitude. It felt like my family had convinced themselves that their lifestyle was somehow self-sustaining, despite overwhelming evidence that they couldn't afford any of it without my income. They had adapted to their dependence on me so completely that they no longer saw it as dependence at all. Michelle's behavior over the 3 years I had been supporting her education had shifted from grateful student, trying to make the most of opportunities, to entitled young adult who expected luxury and privilege as her natural due. The expensive private university had apparently taught her more about designer brands and status symbols than about gratitude, financial responsibility, or realistic expectations for post-graduation life. Her social media was filled with photos of expensive dinners at restaurants I knew she couldn't afford, designer purses that cost more than I spent on rent, and jewelry that seemed excessive for a college student living entirely on family support. When I had gently asked her once about where the money for these purchases came from, she had responded vaguely about birthday gifts and savings, without acknowledging that she had no income to generate savings, and that the birthday gifts were probably purchased by parents who had no money of their own. The $9,000 necklace that would become the center of the false accusation destroying my family relationships had appeared on Michelle's Instagram 3 weeks before the incident. It was a delicate piece with what appeared to be genuine diamonds in a distinctive setting that spelled out her initials, and I had noticed it immediately because of its obvious expense and my knowledge that Michelle couldn't possibly afford it herself. I had assumed that Douglas or Helen had somehow scrounged up money for an extravagant gift despite their financial situation, or that Michelle had a secret source of income she wasn't sharing with the family. The idea that she might have purchased it with credit she couldn't pay off never occurred to me, though in retrospect, that seems like the most likely explanation for how an unemployed student financed a luxury jewelry purchase. The accusation came during a routine family dinner at Douglas and Helen's house, the house I was paying rent for, filled with furniture I had helped purchase, lit by electricity I was funding, where we ate food I had paid for. I attended these dinners weekly despite my demanding work schedule, because maintaining family relationships seemed important, and because I wanted to see tangible evidence that my financial support was actually helping, rather than just enabling dysfunction. Michelle had been in a mood throughout dinner, making cutting comments about various topics and people in that way that signaled she was looking for conflict or attention. Her comments about her university classmates were particularly cruel, mocking their clothing choices, their social status, their career aspirations, in ways that suggested she had absorbed the worst aspects of luxury brand culture without understanding how precarious her own position actually was. "Some people just don't understand quality," Michelle said at one point, examining her own manicured nails with obvious satisfaction. "They buy cheap things and wonder why nothing in their life looks good. You get what you pay for." The irony of someone living entirely on family financial support lecturing about understanding quality and paying for things wasn't lost on me, but I had learned not to challenge Michelle's increasingly entitled worldview, because doing so only created family drama where I was cast as the jealous older sister who couldn't appreciate Michelle's sophistication. The conversation had moved to other topics: Helen's workplace frustrations, Douglas's ongoing unsuccessful job search, my own work travel schedule, when Michelle suddenly stood up from the table with a gasp of apparent horror. "My necklace," she said, her voice rising with panic. "The diamond initial necklace. It's gone. I can't find it anywhere." The statement was delivered with such dramatic alarm that everyone at the table immediately focused attention on Michelle and her missing jewelry crisis, which I suspected was exactly the attention she had been seeking throughout the evening with her various provocative comments. "When did you last see it?" Helen asked, immediately shifting into supportive mother mode and treating Michelle's missing necklace as though it was a genuine emergency, rather than a woman misplacing her own jewelry. "It was in my room this morning," Michelle said, and I noticed her eyes shifting toward me even as she answered Helen's question. "I specifically remember seeing it on my dresser when I got ready for class. Someone must have taken it." The accusation wasn't explicit yet, but the implication was clear from the way Michelle was looking at me, and from the theatrical quality of her panic about a necklace that had probably just been misplaced somewhere in her perpetually messy bedroom. "Nobody took your necklace, Michelle," I said calmly, recognizing that I was being set up for some kind of drama, but not yet understanding how severe the consequences would be. "You probably just put it somewhere and forgot. Check your jewelry box or your bathroom counter." "I already checked everywhere," Michelle said, her voice becoming more shrill and accusatory. "It's not in any of the normal places. Someone came into my room and took it while I was out." "Michelle, that's ridiculous," I said, feeling my own frustration building at being implicated in theft of jewelry I had never touched. "Why would anyone take your necklace? You probably just misplaced it." And then Michelle said the words that would change everything. "You took it. You've always been jealous of my things. I know you took my necklace." The direct accusation, delivered in front of my parents at a dinner table in a home I was financing, felt like being slapped. The absurdity of being accused of stealing jewelry from someone whose entire existence I was funding should have been immediately obvious to anyone who thought about the situation logically, but logic wasn't operative in what happened next. Douglas stood up from the table, his face flushed with anger, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen directed toward me before: complete conviction of my guilt and total absence of doubt about his younger daughter's accusation. "Did you take Michelle's necklace?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. "No," I said, shocked that he was even asking the question rather than dismissing Michelle's accusation as the attention-seeking drama it obviously was. Of course I didn't take her necklace. I've never touched her jewelry. She misplaced it somewhere in her room. She says you took it, Douglas said, as though Michelle's statement was sufficient evidence to convict without any need for investigation or proof. She's your sister. Why would she lie about something like this? Why would I steal from her? I responded, my voice rising with indignation at being treated like a criminal based on nothing but Michelle's word. This is insane. I didn't touch her necklace. But Douglas wasn't listening to my defense or considering the logical problems with Michelle's accusation. Instead, he reached across the table and grabbed my car keys from where I had set them next to my phone. "Get out," he said, his voice cold and final. "Get out of this house and don't come back. I won't have a thief in my family." The shock of being physically expelled from the house I was secretly paying for was so overwhelming that I initially couldn't process what was happening. I stood there staring at my father holding my keys, watching my mother sit silent and passive while I was accused of theft and thrown out, seeing Michelle's satisfied expression as she observed the consequences of her false accusation. "You're throwing me out?" I asked, needing confirmation that this was actually happening and not some nightmare I would wake from. "Based on Michelle saying I took something, with no evidence, no investigation. Nothing? You're just throwing me out? You're not welcome here anymore," Douglas said, and I could see that he had convinced himself of my guilt so completely that nothing I said would change his mind. "Leave now, or I'll call the police and have you removed for theft." Have you ever been so shocked by injustice that you couldn't immediately formulate a response because your mind was rejecting the reality of what was happening? That's exactly what I experienced standing in that dining room, being expelled from my family based on a false accusation while the people I had been supporting financially accepted that accusation without question. I looked at Helen, giving her one opportunity to defend me or at least advocate for investigation before judgment, but she remained silent, apparently convinced that protecting the baby, Michelle, was more important than considering whether the accusation might be false or whether I deserved due process before being expelled from the family. I walked toward the front door, then turned back one more time hoping that someone, anyone, would recognize the absurdity of what was happening and stop this insane escalation. But Douglas was standing firm, still holding my keys, and Michelle was watching with barely concealed satisfaction at having successfully created drama and removed me from family standing with a single accusation. "You're really doing this," I said, not quite believing it was real. "You're throwing me out of this house based on her saying I took something without any evidence or investigation." "Leave," Douglas repeated, and I heard the finality in his voice that told me there was no reasoning with him or appealing to logic. I left the house I had been paying rent for, got into my car using my spare key, and drove to my own apartment thinking about the family I had been supporting and the accusation that had just destroyed our relationships. But I was also thinking about all the automatic payments scheduled to process over the next week. The rent payment, Michelle's tuition installment, the utility bills, the grocery delivery, and about how none of those payments would be processed unless I allowed them to happen. The people who had just thrown me out based on a false accusation were about to learn exactly what I had been providing for them, and they were going to learn it through the most undeniable method possible. By experiencing life without my financial support when bills came due and nothing was paid. I sat in my apartment for approximately 30 minutes after leaving my family's house, staring at my laptop and phone while processing what had just happened and considering what I should do next. The shock of being falsely accused and expelled was gradually transforming into cold fury about how little my family valued me compared to how much they depended on my income. The logical inconsistency of their position was staggering. They believed I was a thief who would steal from my own sister, but they had never questioned where the money came from to pay their rent, cover Michelle's tuition, or maintain the comfortable lifestyle they had been enjoying despite having no sustainable income source. They were willing to believe the worst about my character, while never wondering about the best of my generosity. I opened my banking app and navigated to the bill payment section where I had set up automatic transfers for every family expense I had been covering. The list was longer than I had realized when looking at all the scheduled payments together. Rent to Douglas and Helen's landlord, $2,400 monthly. Next payment due in 4 days. Michelle's university tuition, $3,167 monthly installment. Next payment due in 6 days. Electric utility, $180 monthly, due in 3 days. Water sewer, $95 monthly, due in 8 days. Natural gas, $75 monthly, due in 5 days. Internet service, $89 monthly, due in 2 days. Grocery delivery service, $600 monthly. Next, delivery scheduled in 1-day car insurance. Douglas and Helen's vehicles, $245 monthly, due in 9 days. Helen's supplemental health insurance, $320 monthly, due in 7 days. The total monthly support was $7,171, which meant I had been spending over $86,000 annually to support a family that had just expelled me based on a false accusation without investigation. The money I could have been using for my own house purchase, retirement savings, travel, or investment was instead going to people who apparently valued me so little that they believed I would steal from them. I systematically canceled every automatic payment, deleted every scheduled transfer, and removed my payment information from every account that was set up to charge my credit cards for family expenses. The cancellation process took approximately 20 minutes and transformed my financial obligations from supporting 4 adults to supporting only myself. The grocery delivery that was scheduled for the next day was canceled, meaning they would discover that absence almost immediately. The internet service payment that was due in 2 days would fail to process, likely resulting in service suspension by day 4. The electric bill due in 3 days would bounce, triggering late fees and disconnection warnings. And the rent payment due in 4 days, the single largest expense and the one most critical to their housing security, would simply not be paid. I didn't send an explanatory message or a detailed breakdown of what I had been paying for. I didn't lecture them about gratitude or consequences or the irony of accusing their financial lifeline of theft. I simply sent a 2-word text message to the family group chat. Good luck. Then I blocked all their phone numbers, muted their social media accounts, and went to bed feeling more peaceful than I had felt in 3 years of carrying financial responsibility for people who apparently didn't respect or value me. The next morning, I woke up to 53 missed calls from numbers I had blocked, along with voicemails that my phone had automatically transcribed. The transcriptions showed escalating panic about the grocery delivery cancellation that they had discovered when the scheduled delivery didn't arrive, and growing awareness that something had changed with the financial arrangements they had been taking for granted. I didn't listen to the voicemails or respond to the messages. I went to work, met with physicians about cardiovascular drug protocols, and focused on my own career, rather than on the family crisis that was unfolding as bills came due and nothing was paid. Whatever chaos my family was experiencing was entirely of their own making. They had chosen to believe a false accusation without investigation, and now they were discovering the consequences of expelling the person who had been funding their entire lifestyle. The impact of the canceled payments unfolded over the next week, exactly as I had anticipated, creating a cascade of consequences that forced my family to confront the reality of their financial situation and their dependence on income I had been providing. Day 2. After my expulsion, the internet service was disconnected for non-payment, which probably felt like a minor inconvenience until they realized that restoring service would require paying not just the past due bill, but also a reconnection fee and possibly a deposit since payment had failed. Day 3. The electric utility sent a disconnection warning for the unpaid bill, giving them 10 days to pay before service would be terminated. The warning probably triggered the first serious panic about whether my family's comfortable lifestyle was actually sustainable without my financial support. Day 4, the rent payment failed to process, and their landlord sent a notice about the missed payment along with a late fee of $150 and a warning that repeated non-payment would result in eviction proceedings. This was probably the moment when Douglas and Helen began to understand that I had been paying their rent. All of it. Every month for 3 years, and that losing my support meant losing their housing. Day 6, Michelle received an email from her university's financial office indicating that her account had a hold due to unpaid tuition. The hold meant she couldn't register for next semester's classes, couldn't access certain campus services, and would face academic suspension if the balance wasn't paid within 30 days. This was probably when Michelle discovered that the expensive private education she had been treating as her entitlement was actually being fully funded by the sister she had falsely accused of theft. Day 8. The water utility sent a service disconnection warning for the unpaid bill, and Helen's supplemental health insurance sent a cancellation notice for the failed premium payment. The accumulation of unpaid bills and threatened service disconnections was probably creating genuine panic by this point, as my family realized the scope of my financial support and the disaster they faced without it. I monitored all of this from a distance through information I could access about accounts that had been in my name, or that sent copies of notices to my email address. I didn't contact my family or offer to restore any of the canceled payments. I simply watched as the natural consequences of their false accusation and their expulsion of me played out through unpaid bills and disconnected services. The desperate attempts to contact me continued throughout the week, evolving from confused questions about why payments weren't processing to panicked pleas for me to restore financial support to angry accusations that I was being vindictive by cutting them off. But none of the messages acknowledged that they had falsely accused me of theft, expelled me from the family without investigation, or needed to apologize for their treatment of me. The messages seemed to operate on the assumption that I had some obligation to continue supporting them financially regardless of how they treated me, and that my withdrawal of support was somehow more wrong than their false accusation and expulsion. The entitlement was breathtaking in its audacity. 2 weeks after my expulsion, I received a message from Helen that finally acknowledged at least some reality about what had occurred. "We need to talk about the financial situation. We didn't realize you were covering so many expenses. The rent is due and we don't have the money to pay it. Michelle's tuition is overdue and the university is threatening suspension. We're going to lose everything if you don't help us. Please call me." The message still didn't include an apology for the false accusation, still didn't acknowledge that throwing me out had been wrong, and still didn't address the fundamental injustice of expelling someone based on nothing but an accusation. But it did finally admit that my family had been completely dependent on my income and was now facing disaster without it. I responded with a brief message that made my position clear. "You threw me out of your house and called me a thief based on Michelle's accusation without any investigation or evidence. You expelled your financial lifeline based on a lie. Whatever financial crisis you're facing now is the direct consequence of your choice to believe false accusations instead of investigating the truth. I won't be restoring any financial support, and I have no interest in discussing this further." 3 days after that exchange, I received the message I had been expecting since the beginning of this entire disaster, a text from Michelle that read, "I found my necklace. It was in my jewelry box the whole time. I guess I forgot I put it there. Sorry for the confusion." The casual, "sorry for the confusion," as though she had made a minor mistake rather than a false accusation that destroyed family relationships, and revealed that I had been supporting everyone financially, was stunning in its inadequacy. There was no acknowledgement that her accusation had been recklessly false, no recognition that she had caused me to be expelled from the family, no understanding that her careless accusation had exposed everyone's dependence on income I was no longer providing. I didn't respond to Michelle's message. The necklace being found didn't change anything about what had happened or about my family's priorities and values. They had believed the worst about me without investigation, expelled me without hearing my defense, and were now facing the consequences of their choice to protect Michelle's dramatic accusation rather than considering the truth. 4 weeks after my expulsion, I received notification that Douglas and Helen were being evicted from their rental house for non-payment of rent. Michelle was academically suspended from her university for failure to pay her tuition balance, with a hold on her transcript that would prevent her from transferring credits to any other institution until the debt was paid. Helen's health insurance had been canceled, and multiple utility services had been disconnected for non-payment. The financial collapse of my family's lifestyle was complete and total, revealing that every aspect of their comfortable existence had been built on my income and was completely unsustainable without my continued support. They were facing eviction, academic suspension, service disconnections, and financial disaster because they had falsely accused and expelled the person who had been keeping them afloat. I felt no guilt about their situation and no temptation to restore the financial support I had withdrawn. They had made their choice when they believed Michelle's false accusation without investigation, and they were now living with the natural consequences of that choice. 6 months after being expelled from my family, I received a final message from Douglas that attempted to frame the entire disaster as somehow having been caused by my overreaction, rather than by their false accusation and unjust expulsion of me. Sarah, 6 months have passed since the misunderstanding about Michelle's necklace. We've lost our home. Michelle had to leave her university, and we're all struggling financially. I understand you were upset about being accused, but I think your response was disproportionate to what happened. We're family, and families work through problems together rather than abandoning each other. I'm asking you to reconsider cutting us off and to help us recover from this difficult situation. The characterization of being falsely accused and expelled as a misunderstanding, the suggestion that my response was disproportionate, and the accusation that I had abandoned them rather than acknowledging that they had expelled me, revealed that Douglas still didn't understand what had actually happened or why their treatment of me had been unforgivable. I sent one final response that made my position absolutely clear. You threw me out of your house based on a false accusation without investigation or evidence. You expelled me from the family because Michelle said I stole from her, and you believed her accusation without question despite having no proof. The financial crisis you're experiencing now is the natural consequence of expelling the person who had been secretly supporting your entire lifestyle. You discovered I had been paying for everything only after you lost access to my income, which proves you never valued my contributions. You only valued my money. I have no interest in restoring financial support to people who demonstrated they don't respect me. Don't contact me again. If you're reading this and you're dealing with family members who falsely accuse you, expel you without investigation, or take your financial support for granted while treating you poorly, please know that you have the right to withdraw that support regardless of how they characterize your boundaries as abandonment or overreaction. Financial support should flow from healthy relationships built on mutual respect, not from obligation to people who believe the worst about you while depending on your income. Sometimes the most powerful response to false accusations and unjust expulsion is allowing the accusers to experience life without the support they were taking for granted. When the house panicked over unpaid bills, entitled, "People Learn Exactly Who Was Holding Their Life Together." If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.